Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a nice day. My name is Elvis, and this is a new episode of the LLM News, a weekly series where I cover the latest in AI and the world of LLMs. First up, we have a major announcement from Utah Labs, and they are announcing Moshi. And what they mention here about Moshi is that it's a lowest latency conversational AI ever released, and this is going to be open source. This is the exciting news here. It's a single audio language model that you can speak with, and it engages in role play and many emotions and speaking styles as well. And check out their YouTube channel where they go into more details about Moshi and how they created this conversational AI system. And also, you can use it here. And a few details were also released, but I would say we still have to wait for the technical report to get all the architectural details and what type of training data was used, right? What were the decision making with the architecture itself, how different inputs and modalities are processed. All of that I think is still very big, but I think we will know more as more details are released. And since this is an open source project, all of that detail is expected to be released. What I mentioned here is that Moshi is an audio language model that can listen and speak continuously with no need for explicitly modeling speaker turns or interruptions. When talking to Moshi, you will notice that the UI displays a transcript of its speech. This does not come from an ASR, nor is an input to a TTS, text to speech, but is rather part of the integrated multimodal modeling of Moshi. So you can find a lot of interesting demos in the YouTube stream that they were doing on this announcement. So do check out their YouTube channel for more. Next up, we have this announcement from Runway. Now, we discussed Gen 3, we featured it in a previous LLM news episode, and it's finally being made available to everyone. So now everyone can go and use this high fidelity, fast and controllable video generation system, and it's available to try here. So I just wanted to feature it here because this is something we featured in the previous LLM news, and it's now actually available to use. The introduction. Next up is this introduction of RouteLLM, a routing framework based on human preference data that directs simple queries to a cheaper model. So you might have a model, you may have a couple of models that you use from your providers, but it'll be interesting to see if you have a more complex system that allows you to route queries and requests based on the capabilities of those models. I think this is what they're getting at. And they mention here is that with data augmentation techniques, RouteLLM achieves cost reductions of over 85% on empty bench and 45% on MMLU while maintaining 95% of the GPT-4 performance. Comparing against commercial offerings, on empty bench and achieve the same performance while being over 30% cheaper. It says here our model datasets and code for serving and evaluating LLM routers are all open source. And I think the main take here is the ability to serve queries to cheaper models, right? That's the whole concept here. But also, I think what makes sense is not only the cost, but also performance as well. And this is what they're reporting here. You really need good quality outputs. Obviously, you don't want to sacrifice that over cost. I think that's really important for companies. And so I think this sort of system where it tries to put different solutions and different ideas together is sort of trending now. And I'm excited about this whole idea of routing LLMs. So I think it's really good to check this out to keep up to date with what's going on. Something they mentioned here as well is that by routing between GPT-4 and Mixtral 8x7b, they demonstrate cost reductions of over 85% and 45% on MMLU while achieving 95% of GPT-4's performance. Next up, we have from Salesforce AI Research. They released Tiny Giant 1 billion parameter model. It's now the best micromodel for function calling, outperforming models 7x its size, including GPT 3.5 and cloud. So now this is a model that's specifically trained to perform function calling, and they have an entire paper about this. You can find it here. But this is exciting because I think I get questions a lot about function calling, and a lot of people are interested, especially in the enterprise space. And they are always asking for recommendation about function calling. They're interested in using it, and my typical recommendation is don't use a general purpose model for that. Try to start with something that has been trained specifically to do function calling. I think that's a good starting point, and it's usually a combination of models that support function calling will give you the best results, right? So a more like an agentic type of workflow will give you that. Very similar to the LLM routing idea, I would say, something worth exploring. But I get excited when I see companies releasing these function calling specific models because I think they're really powerful and very capable, and they're really good at that specific task. Next up, we have Mixture of a Million Experts. This is a new paper that came out and from Google DeepMind and introduces a parameter-efficient expert retrieval mechanism that leverages the product key technique for sparse retrieval from a million tiny experts. So I think the way these experts are trained and used, they can be large and they can be computationally intensive. And so what they're trying out here is to apply all these ideas, but trying to create like more tiny experts, right? Like a million of them in this case. And they attempt to decouple computational costs from parameter count by efficiently routing to a very large number of tiny experts through a learned index structure used for routing. It demonstrates superior efficiency compared to dense feed-forward networks, coarse-grained mixture of experts, and product key memory layers. So there are all these mechanisms that are being used now for efficiency, and apparently they claim that their peer mechanism or peer layer that they introduce peer to these ones as well that are being used for efficiency's sake. Next up, I have this interesting paper that came out recently. It says is scaling synthetic data creation with a 1 billion personas. So why I think this paper is interesting is because there's a lot of interest in synthetic data, right? Generating synthetic data with LLMs. However, when you're generating synthetic data, what you will notice when you're doing this for a long time is that the data could be pretty generic, right? And so you may want to diversify data. You want to create maybe unique data. And so what you're proposing here is to do it in a different way, right? Rather than making it instance driven or key point driven. Most of the approaches today use either of these two, but these approaches lack the desired coverage, quality, and perspectives needed to robustly scale the data synthesis process. So let's say you were creating a conversational agent, right? And it's between a community or a social network or something like that. Somebody's interacting with that. I think the idea of having personas gives you different perspectives or gives the LLM different perspectives, and I think that's really powerful. And they show that it's effective for like math problems, but it can also be used to generate logical reasoning problems, instructions, gain NPCs, tool development, knowledge rich text, and many more use cases. I think it's an incredible idea. And this one comes from Tencent AI Lab, so do check it out. Next up, we have this paper that came out also recently on reasoning in LLMs at geometric perspective. So we know that chain of thought and all these reasoning approaches or prompting methods, they elicit reasoning in LLMs, but we don't really know too much about the inner workings and what happens behind the hood, right, with these LLMs. And so what this paper aims to do is to do it from a more mathematical perspective, and in specifically using geometrical perspective. And I've seen a couple of papers like this in the past where we want to understand the lattice space, understand what word embeddings are, and these representations that are learned from these LLMs and these systems. And so I think going in that direction, while theoretic, right, you can find a lot of interesting things that can allow you to more better understand what these LLMs and how they make decisions, especially for something as important as reasoning and potentially in the future with agentic workflows like planning, for instance. So I like these papers when they come out because they do give some insight into how these models work, right? What's the connection in this case? What they mention is connection between the expressive power of LLMs and the density of their self-attention graphs. I think self-attention is a very powerful mechanism, very powerful technique, but we don't fully understand what it does in the context of like an LLM, right? How it interacts with other components and so on. So I think this is an interesting paper. There's a lot of these different papers that have been released recently trying to understand LLMs. I wanted to highlight this paper as well, searching for best practices in RAG. Lots of companies, lots of developers are interested in using RAG, and this one basically summarizes like chunking strategies, the embeddings to use, when to use embeddings, when to fine tune it potentially, right? What are the right embeddings to use, different vector database solutions, retrieval techniques as well, right? When to use BM25, Contriver, LLM embedding, hybrid search, and so on, and re-ranking and so forth, right? So how to do evaluation. So I think this is a really comprehensive report, and it basically summarizes best practices when building RAG systems. Next up is this paper, Self-Evaluation as a Defense Against Adversarial Attacks on LLMs. I did a summary of this paper. I was really fascinated by it because when we work with companies, we often get a lot of requests for how to build like verification systems or systems that can be used to defend against adversarial attacks. So when you're building an application that's based on LLMs for companies, they're very, very interested in that because obviously if anything goes wrong with that LLM or that LLM is producing sort of bad information or harmful outputs, for instance, that can affect the user, then in that case, right, becomes really a problem for that business or that brand. And so they're interested in building these defenses. And so what this paper does is it goes through evaluation of how to use self-evaluation to defend against adversarial attacks. There are a lot of experiments that they conducted, and I would highly encourage developers specifically that are building with LLMs to check out the paper because I think the evaluation suite that they're using is very close to what you would use in the production setting, which is you need to check for different settings. For instance, some attacks may be in the generator, but then some attacks may also be in the generator and evaluator if you're using some sort of evaluator as well. And this evaluator, by the way, that they talk about in this paper is backed by a large language model. So using a pre-trained language model that's untouched, you don't touch the weights on that. And so how to build something very effective, but also evaluate continuously. So I like what they mentioned in this paper, all the discussion around it. And again, I did a YouTube video on this. Just check out my channel and you will find it. Next up is OpenAutoCoder agentless, and they propose a simple agentless solution. So we talk a lot about agentic solutions in our channel, but here it's using a simple one without those agents to solve 27.3% of GitHub issues on the SWE bench, which is now a very popular benchmark, and specifically the light one with 0.34, so 34 cents each, outperforming all open source AI SW agents. So we have a bunch of them already, right? So we have SWE agent, AutoCode Rover. I didn't even know about this one. OpenDevin, very popular one. Aider, and now we have this agentless. And so there's a lot of interest in that. I love the open source efforts, and obviously this one has a paper, and you can fully check out their details, and they have open sourced it as well. One avoids using the agentic workflows, and they go with a much simpler solution. So I think this is an interesting paper to also look at to see how LLMs are being used and different ways how you can build systems with LLMs without having to build complexity into it, because I think that's what's happening today, right? There's a lot of complexity that's being built in to LLM-based applications that are unnecessary. And this happens not only with agentic workflows, but it also happens with like RAG systems and even prompt engineering efforts from what I've seen. And so try to simplify things, I think, is a good approach, and also it shows to be effective here as well. Next up, I have a series of tools that were released. What I typically do in LLM news, I cover like the biggest industry news, then we cover a few interesting papers that might have some practical insights, and then I also cover a few tools that will be interesting for developers or people experimenting with LLMs today or generative AI. This first one is Satyrn. Is a modern Jupyter client for Mac with AI-enabled inline code generation. So it reads all the context and generates code automatically. It's very easy to use. What I like about this is a dedicated Jupyter system or client, right? Which is really powerful because you don't really need, something like a full-blown IDE, right? Which is something like VS Code or something like that, which I use a lot. And so it's really good that we have dedicated tools like this, and it's leveraging the power of code generation of these LLMs and these AIs that are being built today. You can use the OpenAI models, but I would love to have support also for CodeStrel, DeepSeek Coder version 2, and all these code models that have been recently released. The next one closely related to this is Pretzel. And again, modernizing the Jupyter experience, right? So pretty much this is what data scientists use and machine learning folks use Jupyter. But now this has all these built-in functionalities that are powered by AI, right? And AI specifically that's good at code generation. And they have a lot of features like editing, inline tab completion, sidebar chat, and error fixing, automatic error fixing. And I've done a video about this. You can check it out. I'll link it in the description box. So if you're interested to check out what this is about, I think it's exciting to see this, and also the previous one that I showed as well, how all of this AI is enabling experiences and helping out like developers and data scientists in this case. Next up, we have this GPT4All, again, another really powerful tool, I think, for developers. This one is a 3.0, and it's an open source local LLM desktop app. So I haven't seen this one before. Apparently, there is already a 3.0 for this. It gives you a private experience. It supports thousands of models and all major operating systems. It has a major UI UX improvements. Again, I didn't know that this exists. By the way, there are so many tools like Olama. There is LM Studio that I also used before, and many other types of playgrounds. But I'm glad that there's a playground where you can upload files locally and you can use this privately, right? So combine an LLM privately with your local files. That's a really powerful combination. And so I'm excited about this tool as well and to be able to use this. And so do check it out if you're interested in using LLMs locally. And here are more details about GPT-4All. So they say that your chats are private and never leave your device. Run language models on consumer hardware. So all types of hardware are supported. Chat with your local files. So if you want something where you can chat with your local documents, PDFs, text files, whatever that may be, this is probably one of the solutions that you might want to check out. You can explore over thousands of open source language models, as mentioned here, from Mistral, Nus Hermes, Llama, and so on. And again, you can customize the experience, right? Customize your chat. You can use different system prompts, temperature values, context length, batch size, and more. So I think this is really powerful. It gives you customization. It makes the experience of using AI or LLMs more personalized. And I think the idea of having chat without internet is really powerful, right? Because I know a lot of you are probably using ChatGPT or using other playgrounds like Cloud and so on. And nothing against those. Those are amazing tools. But I do think there are a lot of use cases where you want to keep your files private, or you may have a lot of files locally where you want to maybe use an LLM to interact with those documents. And I think this is a good option as well. Next up, we have, this is more for educational purposes, Understanding Deep Learning, this really interesting book, which summarizes all the fundamental building blocks of deep learning, like transformers, graph neural networks, reinforcement learning, diffusion models, and much more. And I think this is probably one of the most comprehensive, up-to-date overviews of deep learning and all its concepts that exist today. So there are a lot of really cool deep learning books that you can look into, really great explanations of concepts with code. Dive into Deep Learning is one of those books, one of my favorite books, actually. But I think those books get outdated pretty quickly. And so really nice to have a book that's regularly updated and has explanation, even the math for it, to understand important concepts in deep learning, which power pretty much this whole space of generative AI. And lastly, we have this new state of the art report. There are a lot of different state of the art reports from what I've seen, different companies and folks writing these. And I often like to look at this just to have different perspectives. And this one, they ask 750 tech folks, including developers, data teams, leadership, and other across technical roles and industries, to share their takes. And so this is about use cases, right? What are the use cases that are being supported or enabled by all this latest generative AI technology like language models, and really what's the return of investment as well, right? So are chatbots thriving? That might be a question that you may have, because you may want to invest or you may want to power your business by chatbots. And so I think understanding of that, understanding of the AI stack as well is really important. How is it generating use cases? How is it generating value? What's the business value here? And there has been obviously a lot of optimism, but a lot of skepticism as well. So I really like looking into these type of reports to learn more about how others are using AI and how they're creating value. So if you want to learn more about that, I think these are the type of reports that you want to look into. And I was recommended this by a friend, so I wanted to kind of feature it here. So that will be it for this episode of LLM News. Hope Hopefully, there was something for each one of you. And thanks again so much for supporting this channel and this series. I will continue to do this. I'll continue to make sure that I feature the best of information for folks building with LLMs and AI engineers and data scientists. And so that's kind of my goal with this series. So thanks again for all the support. Please leave a like, leave a comment if you prefer to see more of a specific type of content. And lastly, feel free to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel. So that'll be it. Thank you so much and stay tuned for the next one. Bye bye.